There are all sorts of reasons why someone might go missing. Some of the strangest missing persons cases are ones where the person doesn't even realize they're missing. Years after first disappearing, police were finally able to close these cold cases. Number 5. Years after her family lost contact with her, Nicole Denise Jackson was finally located in Germany earlier this year. Nicole had been missing since around 2018, and her family weren't even sure if she was still alive. But they didn't give up hope and managed to raise the money to hire an investigator to take on the case. Nicole was 21 years old when she left her home in Birmingham, Alabama, to travel to Germany. She was traveling with her boyfriend, a man her family didn't know very well, but they assumed that he was someone she went to school with. Nicole was a singer and was looking to pursue her new music career in Europe. After arriving in Germany, she told her family she was planning to attend school there to study music as it would be free. But after a few months, communication with her petered out. The last time her sister heard her voice was Christmas of 2018. After that point, Nicole would send sporadic text messages, but when her family tried to contact her on any of the numbers she used, the calls wouldn't connect. It was clear that this wasn't just someone who had forgotten to get in touch with her loved ones. It seemed whoever was sending the messages didn't want to talk with them. Activity on Nicole's social media accounts also stopped, and her Instagram account was deleted entirely, something that her family said was very unlike her. Her family only grew more concerned when they realized that Nicole's boyfriend wasn't someone she knew from school. Nicole had met him online. It's not clear if Nicole had ever met him in person before traveling to Germany with him, but her family believed he was from the Munich area. The actions, or lack of them, was very unlike Nicole, and her family was concerned for her safety. There was a fear she might have fallen foul of something extremely sinister, such as human trafficking, and they weren't sure they would ever get answers. The language barriers only made things harder, and when the COVID-19 pandemic limited travel, the family was practically cut off from getting any answers in Germany. But once borders reopened, the family was quick to act. A private investigator working for Nicole's family traveled to Germany. They were able to locate Nicole's boyfriend's landlord and place of work. Finally, at the end of July of 2021, Nicole herself came forward. She contacted the State Department in Germany, having discovered her family was looking for her. She confirmed her identity with an ID card, and officials in Germany were able to confirm she was safe and in good health. Why she stopped contacting her family remains a mystery, but they're just relieved to know that she's still alive and accept that she'll contact them when she's ready. Number 4. Detectives in Australia managed to close a 50-year-old case after they discovered the missing person was alive and well, living on the other side of the world. It was the 1960s when Otto Hein disappeared from Western Australia. Otto had immigrated to Australia from Austria with his parents and 4 brothers in the late 1960s. He picked up work at a farm just outside of town. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary when, in May of 1969, he told his boss he was going into town to pick up cigarettes. But Otto would never come back. It's not clear when exactly Otto was reported missing, or who reported him missing, as it doesn't seem to have been his family. Whatever the case, when police pulled him over in a town 8 hours from where he had gone missing, the missing person case wasn't on their mind. Otto gave them a fake name, as he himself didn't have a driver's license. He wasn't held and drove away. It was the last time police in Australia would see Otto for 50 years. The car Otto had been driving was found abandoned 2 weeks after he left the farm. It had run out of gas, and now police were concerned foul play may have been involved. Around the same time that Otto had disappeared, a hitchhiker had taken the life of someone who had picked him up. stealing the vehicle and dumping the body in the bush. When police caught up with him, they found maps that indicated he'd driven through the area where Otto was last seen, and they believed that Otto may have been another victim. But the suspect denied any knowledge of Otto and had an alibi for the time the missing man disappeared. The case went cold. Police periodically looked into the case over the years, but strangely never seemed to get in contact with Otto's family that were still living in Victoria. In 2019, someone finally thought to contact his brothers about the missing person case. They were shocked to discover that Otto wasn't considered missing by his family at all. After Otto had been pulled over, he had panicked. He drove the car until it ran out of fuel, and then hitchhiked around Australia for a few months. The behavior was typical of Otto at the time. He would often go off without telling anyone. In 1970, he returned to Austria, completed national service, and moved to Italy. Sometime in the 1980s, he and his wife moved to Sicily, where they settled down and started a family. Nobody in the Hine family realized Otto was considered missing. Police contacted Otto via Skype and confirmed this was the man they had been looking for 50 years. They managed to close the case and gave hope that other missing person cases might have happy endings. Number 3. There are lots of cases of Japanese soldiers from World War II being found years or even decades after they last saw their homeland. The most famous of those are the soldiers that never gave up fighting the war. But the story of ISHINOSUKE Uwano is quite a bit different to the other tales. It took 6 decades for ISHINOSUKE to return to Japan, and he didn't spend that time hiding in the jungles of Southeast Asia, fighting a guerrilla campaign. ISHINOSUKE was still a teenager when he was drafted into the Japanese Imperial Army and deployed in 1942. At the time, the southern half of the island belonged to Japan, while the northern was part of the Soviet Union. But after the USSR declared war on Japan, the Soviet army steamrolled the Japanese garrison. The soldiers there fought bravely, but the Soviet forces could not be stopped. Those that survived the attack were taken to prisoner of war camps where they spent their time doing hard labor. ISHINOSUKE's family assumed that he was among those captured. After the war, the prisoners were gradually released back to Japan, but ISHINOSUKE was not among them. Whether he had passed away in one of the camps during the attack on the island, or was simply missing, remained a mystery for decades. His parents passed away without ever finding out what happened to their son. Up until the year 2000, his family kept ISHINOSUKE's name on the family registry, but eventually they went through the legal process to have him declared as having passed away. But in 2006, officials got a very strange message from the Japanese embassy in Japan. There was a man there claiming to be ISHINOSUKE. What exactly happened in the intervening years isn't clear. Like many war veterans, ISHINOSUKE hadn't spoken much about it, not even to his family members in Japan. It's believed that he managed to escape capture during the Soviet takeover and spent years hiding out on the island behind enemy lines. There were scattered reports of a man matching ISHINOSUKE's description on the island for years after he was last confirmed to have been seen, the last coming from the late 1950s. At some point after the war, he surrendered to the Soviets, but for whatever reason, they didn't inform Japan or ISHINOSUKE's family, and he wasn't repatriated home. Instead, he found his way to Ukraine, where he made a life for himself. He married a local woman, became a naturalized citizen, and raised a family. In 2006, he contacted the embassy to see if he could contact his remaining family in Japan. As he had already been declared deceased in Japan, he wasn't a citizen of that country anymore and had to travel into the country on a Ukrainian passport. He stayed for a week, visiting his surviving relatives and the graves of his parents, but he said he had no interest in living in Japan again, as Ukraine was now his home. Number 2. The disappearance of MAURO was not a cold case in any sense of the word, But his discovery was nothing short of miraculous. Unlike other entries on this list, it wasn't years or decades that MAURO was missing. He went without human contact for just 10 days. But those 10 days had been a battle for survival in the most grueling conditions imaginable. In 1994, MAURO was a former pentathlete looking for his next challenge when his friend told him of the Marathon of the Sands. It was a race in the Moroccan part of the Sahara Desert. MAURO was fascinated by the race and trained hard for it. He worked on keeping his water intake low so he could deal with dehydration that he would face in the desert, and would run 25 miles a day. The training worked well. When the race got underway, MAURO was one of the strongest runners. In a race of about 80 participants, he was 4th overall by the end of the 3rd day, and the 1st Italian. On the 4th day, things took a turn for the worst. MAURO had lost sight of any pace setters when a dust storm hit during the longest stage of the race. Official advice for anybody who gets lost is to stay put, but the sandstorm was so fierce that if MAURO had stayed, he would have been buried alive. He kept walking, his face almost entirely covered to protect himself from the sand. By the time it stopped, it was nighttime. When MAURO woke the following day, he had no idea where he was. For the next day, MAURO kept running, figuring he would meet up with someone soon. But the realization that he was lost slowly sank in. He prepared to spend time wandering through the desert, though the race organizers were looking for him. At one point, a helicopter flew overhead and MAURO fired a flare, but it was too small to see. He stumbled across an abandoned Muslim shrine and stayed there for a few days, drinking fluids from bats. At one point, he considered taking his own life, but it wasn't possible, and he found renewed strength to make his way back home again. MAURO kept walking, following the advice to walk towards the clouds he saw on the horizon in the morning. He came across an oasis and spent hours sipping from the pool. He didn't even have the strength to drink properly. On the 10th day, he came across a camp of Berber women. They gave him goat's milk to drink and food, though he couldn't keep it down and called for help. After days spent wandering in the desert, he was taken to a military base where he discovered that he had wandered into Algeria. He was eventually taken to the hospital and contacted his wife, asking if she already had his funeral. His brother and brother-in-law had joined race organizers to look for him during his 10 days in the desert, and had come across some of his belongings in the shrine, but all were amazed when MAURO turned up alive. He returned to the Marathon of the Sands multiple times in the following years, but has so far not recreated his first experience. Number 1. After Michelle McMullen left her son at a friend's house, she vanished into thin air, and it became one of the strangest unsolved missing persons cases. Years later, she was finally found, working in a hair and beauty salon on the other side of the country. Michelle went missing in September of 2008 in very strange circumstances. She was a student from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, but had been studying in Louisiana. Her course fees, bills, and looking after her son had left her in financial trouble. She worked for a time in a local church, but was fired for poor performance. After she was fired, somebody going through the books found that Michelle had been taking money from the church accounts, increasing her paychecks. The money was all used on her schooling, and it totaled around $2,000. With everything reaching a boiling point, Michelle drove to mid-Pennsylvania to give her son to a friend, asking her not to say anything for a few days. When a few days passed, her friend became worried and contacted Michelle's parents, who contacted police. Her parents feared something terrible must have happened, like falling asleep behind the wheel or meeting foul play. Police believed she was running from the theft accusations. Her car was eventually found abandoned in Maryland. Inside were her purse, money, cards, and all personal identification. Either Michelle had walked away from her life, or someone had dragged her away. Police struggled to find any information on Michelle until in December of that year, a crucial sighting came in. A family friend was in Martinsburg, West Virginia, when he visited the Knight's Inn. Working behind the bar was someone he thought looked very familiar. The person behind the bar, going by the name Monique Watson, recognized him too. She excused herself to her coworkers, then fled the hotel. Michelle had taken on the name of Monique when she arrived in the state. She said she had been abused and was a Hurricane Katrina victim without any paperwork. The owner of the hotel took pity on her and offered her work. According to anyone who knew her in West Virginia, she was a hard worker who hadn't done anything wrong. The friend contacted Michelle's parents, who called police. By the time police in Martinsburg arrived, Michelle had already disappeared again. The case went cold again and would remain that way for another year. The Disappeared show ran a segment on Michelle, but no leads came forward. That was until a rerun of the episode was watched by a woman in California in January of 2011. The woman frequently went to the Creative African Braids and Beauty Shop in Oakland, California. She was a client of Danielle Jones, who had moved to the area 2 years earlier. Danielle told people she had been born in Liberia but moved to Chicago when she was 3 and ran away from her adopted parents who didn't care for her. The owner of the shop took Danielle in and treated her like her own daughter. She taught Danielle to trade, and Danielle quickly took to it. Again, everyone who knew her thought she was a loving young woman who would do no wrong. After the woman realized Danielle was really Michelle, she contacted police, who visited the store. Michelle's lies came tumbling down around her. She said she had never planned anything and spent much of her time on the run living homeless. It had just been impulsive, and she hadn't wanted to hurt anyone. The only reason she didn't call her parents was because she knew they would convince her to come home. Michelle was arrested for the theft and was eventually charged with time served in prison and probation. Her family was just grateful that this strange missing persons case was finally solved. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knots, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.